Welcome everyone to this Circular Fashion Group discussion. We are going to be recording the first part of it and then having a little bit of interactivity and then opening it up to our pilot group here under Chatham House rules, and that second half won't be recorded so that we can all speak freely. But for the first part, I'm really excited to dive into this side of the human side of circularity. We've looked at different definitions of circular economy from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others. And what we often notice is the people seem to be missing. And so we're going to see how those definitions and how our broader sense of inclusive economy apply to the sense of and the definition of circular economy that we're all embracing. And so to lead that discussion, I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Nancy Landrum. I'll let you introduce yourself, Professor, and launch into the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Good morning from Chicago. I am a professor at Loyola University Chicago. I have a joint appointment between the Quinlan School of Business and the Institute of Environmental Sustainability. So my background is a PhD in management, business management. I focus on sustainability management. I teach and research on the classes on the introduction to sustainable business management. I teach and research on biomimicry, and I also teach and research on circular economy, which is what has brought me here today. I have gotten our university affiliated with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so we are one of the profiled universities on their website. So we have classes on circular economy, and when I teach the introduction to the circular economy, one of the things we talk about early on in the semester are some of the critiques of the circular economy. So this is what we want to talk about today. If you could share the slides. Thank you. So we want to discuss the circular economy and the human side of the circular economy. So some of the critiques that we discuss and that we see, there are numerous critiques, but the ones that I see that continue to pop up over and over, and a lot of different critiques, are that the circular economy is still focused on business as usual. It's focused on increasing production, consumption, and growth as our measures of success. That as we implement these different techniques and these different approaches to circular economy, we're still using the same metrics to measure whether or not we have grown, we have increased production, we have increased consumption. So this is one of the critiques, that it continues these same metrics, these same perspectives on production, consumption, and growth. Another critique, of course, is that it only focuses on material and energy flows, which leads us to the last critique that we see over and over, is that it ignores the social aspects. And across different critiques, the social aspects that I see come up most frequently in the research, in the articles, are inequality and poverty, unemployment, and financial exclusion. So on the next slide, my question is, how can we include the human side of circularity? How can we talk about inequality and poverty, unemployment, financial exclusion, and bring that in to the circular economy? Next slide. So when I speak with my students, and we have this discussion in our class, we look specifically at the principles of the circular economy. Those principles, as I'm sure you're aware, are to design out waste and pollution, to keep products and materials in use as long as we can, and to regenerate natural systems. So the question is, how can we transition and talk about these three principles in the realm of the circular economy when we have a focus on the human side of circularity, on social sustainability, on people in the circular economy? So this is what I want to pause, and I want to ask you some questions. My first question, next slide, is what does it mean to design out waste? If we're thinking about inequality and poverty, if we're thinking about unemployment, if we're thinking about financial exclusion, how can we design out waste when we're thinking about people, when we're thinking about our human resources, when we're thinking about the labor that our employees provide? How do we design out waste of people's time, effort, skills, abilities, talents? How do we make better use of training, retraining, and retention? And how can we reduce or eliminate unemployment or underemployment? So from your perspective, I want to ask you to share with me, what do you think it means, or what does it mean to you to design out waste when we're talking about people? What are your thoughts on this?
Hey, I'll start, Nancy. Thank you, by the way, for the time. Obviously, something we don't think about is the human side of this thing. I guess from the initial, we're dealing with footwear and apparel. What we found, on our side of it is because we're dealing with the afterlife and not the new products. So the second life. And we're finding opportunities to actually increase employment simply because in dealing with this mountain of waste that we're creating, it's going to take a lot of human hands. It's impossible to automate it, quite frankly, at the moment. So actually we're finding, and I know that doesn't really answer your question, but we're finding some unique, possibilities right now, including working from home, by the way. In dealing with all this stuff. So, and maybe you'll get into that, but, so hopefully when we're designing clothing in the beginning, from the human side of it, that's a great question. I don't think the designers have gotten into that, quite frankly. They're just trying to think of how to deconstruct products right now or build them so they're deconstructible.
I'll chime in. That was great points. So we've taught about the human element to this and the human side to us. And so my company, Dana Inc., actually tackles the waste problem by empowering the customer to actually co-create with us. So we're encouraging, inspiring them to take the waste in their own, or they consider it waste, which is the secondhand clothing, or to utilize clothing that has a second life, and to create new garments with us. And this is the new frontier, we believe, in fashion, where we are looking at people, consumers, to create new garments from waste. So it's not just the brand that it's doing it, but we're actually co-creating with the customer. And that's all through the stream, from designing from the get-go, all the way to engaging them to a take-back program, and then also including them as the solution to climate change. So what we mean by that is asking them to ask themselves, do you want to know who works behind the production of the cut and sew? So you design it, we digitize fashion now. And if they say yes, and most of them do, we're actually connecting them with the people, right? So the human element is now brought to the forefront. We believe that is the value to making clothing last longer. So you actually know the human aspect to it.
Wonderful.
And can I just build on that slightly as well? I think from that, because you're reconnecting more locally with the process, so it's all about bringing back production to a local source where people are consuming. The employment is therefore happening more locally and is very much more attuned with the process of building that product. So I think it can actually reshore a lot of employment opportunities more locally.
Other thoughts? What about in the beginning of the pandemic in March, many companies laid off and furloughed their employees, but some companies kept their employees on. They found ways to make them available, to continue utilizing them. So in my mind, they didn't waste their employees. They've hired them, they've trained them, they've invested in them, and rather than laying them off, they found ways to utilize them. So in my mind, this is a way that we design out waste. We did not waste these talents that we have and we've developed and we've created. So they found ways to either employ them virtually online, as we heard. Some have allowed their employees to utilize this time for ongoing training and development to learn new skills. Some companies just continued to pay their employees, so they didn't struggle and they didn't have to go look for new employment. So in my mind, this is one way that they did not waste their human resources. This eliminated unemployment and underemployment. This continued to utilize their skills and talents, and they continued to invest in training and retraining.
I have a thought as well. Coming from the corporate sustainability world, one of the things we think a lot about it with employee engagement in sustainability, particularly in larger companies, is the idea of bringing your values to work. So a lot of, especially in larger companies, a lot of employees just sort of come in, they're a cog in the grand machine, they do their function and they clock out. And once we allow them to join a green team, join a community engagement team, take part in the global sort of corporate responsibility endeavor, they find and they report back that, oh, I can now bring, you know, the organic gardening that I do at home or the volunteering that I do in my community, I can bring that to work, and it's more of my whole self. It's sort of more of myself, and then they feel a stronger connection to the company and the work that they do.
That's a wonderful example, and I think it'll come up again here on the next few slides. Other thoughts on how we can design out waste when we're talking about humans and not wasting our talent, not wasting our labor, not wasting the skills and abilities that we have invested in and developed amongst our employees and our workforce. Other thoughts on how we can design out waste?
So the other aspect that we're encouraging is to utilize and to leverage our workforce, not just our own internal customers, but customers at large in the world, to see the connection between clothing and the memories you make with it. And so because clothing reflects memories, you travel the journey of life and you wear clothes. And so when you can see this connection, you're able to initiate new conversations, start new dialogues. And we believe the next frontier of fashion is in the digital world, where you'll have your avatars. We train our employees so that on our customers to have avatars, digital twins, so that they can now not necessarily use new clothing, but maybe their own purposeful clothing, and talk about clothing that they value because they've actually, you know, hit milestones in their lives like birthdays and travel to places. And these are new jobs coming into town, about to hit the market, because we haven't really talked about clothing as conversational pieces. And so I truly believe that's a wasted value. We haven't really seen the connection, and this is truly the uniting the humanity this way, when we can say that we were all at an excursion together and we remembered what we wore.
Yeah. Wonderful. I like that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Let's move on to the next question. The second principle of the circular economy is keeping items in use as long as possible. And again, when we think about our human resources, how can we keep people in use as long as possible? And again, some of the same questions. How can this help us reduce inequality and poverty, unemployment, financial exclusion? How can we continue to utilize those skills and abilities to, again, reduce these layoffs, reduce furloughs, perhaps increase training so that we can help reduce not only poverty, but this unemployment and underemployment. So I shared some examples of the pandemic and what happened in the beginning, companies keeping employees on board, finding ways to retrain them. How else can we keep items in use as long as possible when we're talking about human labor and your employees as these so-called items? How can we keep people in use as long as possible? What are your thoughts on this one?
Hey, it's Scott again. The pandemic's taught us about flexible work and work from home, obviously. So when for us, when we're in an industry where we actually need people in the building, doing things, it's trying to figure out ways that if that's not possible, pandemic or no, meaning that there's a lot of skilled people that are on Social Security or disabilities or things where they actually can't go to a physical workplace, but they have skills and deserve to work. And so if we can find and build models for them being able to come and pick up work or sending work to them, that's what we're trying to do. So for instance, we're making lots of items out of used clothing, reusable tote bags, packaging. So we're building packets that they can literally take home and use their own sewing machine, or we'll provide a sewing machine for them that they can sew at home, and they give back to us and we pay them for it. So just simple ideas like that, I think it retains people, and regardless of if whatever the next thing is that keeps people away from work, how can we continue to make a worthwhile and worthy process? And so rather than just paying people to sit there, if they're paying and they feel valued because they're doing something and still contributing to the company, I think that's meaningful.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Other ways that aren't necessarily new, but involving, increasing employee engagement is really key to retention. So if you form, for example, cooperative models of employment or some sort of mutual share system, if they're involved in the board and decision making, that will definitely influence the kind of employees you have and how long they would like to stay and actually how much they contribute.
Yes.
One other quick idea, I'm just jumping in, but repair is another way that we can keep people engaged. Humans are creative and can come up with beautiful ways to repair old items that maybe machines or other things may not have capacity to do in the same way. So I like the idea of machines taking over the work that is menial and then giving more important and more meaningful work to humans.
Yeah.
I'll jump in the last one. I'll just throw out this one, which is think outside the box. Look at cross-industry initiatives. So for instance, yes, we definitely used our circular principles to make masks and were asked by the first responders, but then we were also contacted by a different group, a different industry, because, so for instance, Canada has banned plastic bags as of January. And so here's a plastic initiative that needs a solution. And so why not use a repurposed textile waste into bags to become grocery bags? So this is thinking outside the box, and people are cross-promoting industries, and I think this is a way of keeping talent in check and in place, and really expanding and looking at creative ways.
Right. So one of the models that we know in Japan, they have lifetime employment. So an individual will join a company and then they stay with that company forever, as long as they want to. If they're not working out in their current position, they're retrained for a different position. Employees have the options and the opportunities to transfer between different roles, different capacities, different positions, different departments. They can continue to be reutilized in many different ways, depending upon what works best for the company and the employee. So it's been pointed out in some of the critiques that our employment system in the United States is very linear. We get our education and training or previous experience. We come into a company, we advance over time with increasing responsibilities, increasing salaries, and whether that be in the same company or different companies, we continue this advancement that is very linear until we finally get to a point of retirement and the person leaves. And now you lose all of those skills and abilities and the institutional memory and everything that goes along with that person's departure. So the question that I've seen in the literature is, why can our system not be more similar to that in Japan, in which people can rotate around to different jobs, different skills, different abilities? Why do they have to go through this linear path and then retire? And perhaps even as you reach retirement, many employees financially have to continue working part-time into their employment. Why can they not just stay in their company, go to a different position that continues to utilize skills? Or maybe the employee wants something altogether different, a new experience, a new department, new skills. Why are these not options in our current employment system? Why is it so linear, where we start at the beginning and we build until we get to the pinnacle and then we leave? So these are some different ideas of how we can keep human resources in use as long as possible.
Nancy, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I think that's such a great point about the life cycle of a person. It's intellectual capital. How are you and other industries trying to break this mold of this linear employment into more of a circular and expansive and a lifetime sort of commitment?
There are some researchers that I'm going to share here at the end of my presentation. Two different researchers in particular, and practitioners in particular, that are working on these issues, the ones that are making the most progress. And I think for this particular item and this concern, I'm going to share with you the work of Alexander Lamille. And he is presenting models and different ideas on ways we can do this with human resources. It's personally not an issue I've addressed in my research and teaching. At this point, it's just discussions for me and my students. But there are researchers in particular, and I'm thinking Lamille, who are working on this, trying to come up with new models, new propositions, new ways we can look at making our human resources more circular and less linear. And this specifically is one of the topics he addresses.
Excellent.
Other thoughts? All right, let's look at the very last one. The third principle of the circular economy is to regenerate natural systems. But what if we think about social systems, human systems? If we think about inequality, poverty, unemployment, financial exclusion, how do we regenerate social systems? How do we regenerate people? How do we regenerate labor and skills? And I think Asheen brought up some wonderful suggestions and thoughts earlier on bringing your values to work, investing in people and their development, and not just their work skills, but their personal development, helping them to regenerate themselves. But also we need to regenerate the entire social system. What are your thoughts on this?
My first thought is that this is so apropos today with the sudden quote unquote focus on racial justice and environmental justice and racial equity. Certainly that's a long-standing cause of really a couple of hundred years in the US. But from my perspective in corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility, it's really the first time that racial justice and racial equity really came to the forefront of what we call CSR, or corporate social responsibility, in the sense that previously a lot of companies were sort of content to be on the sidelines, and suddenly it very rightly became really it really disadvantaged a company in the eyes of the general public to not take a firm anti-racist stance. And I think it was a realization that that sector, perhaps even more than, but certainly in addition to the public sector, bears a responsibility for building some of these labor markets and labor systems and capital systems around anti-racist and equitable and inclusive economies. And so it's been really an interesting movement to watch.
I agree. Companies can no longer sit on the sidelines. And we've seen that over the last 9 months, the uprising and the demand for attention that something needs to be done. So in order to regenerate social systems, companies need to step up. It is time to get involved in addressing these issues so we can regenerate people. What are your other thoughts?
I have a thought on definitions here and holistic viewpoints versus fragmentation. And I think a redefinition of the term natural systems to include humans and social systems is needed. Because if we think of humans as part of, and businesses as part of natural systems, when we have a regenerating, healthy natural system, it includes the environment and people and social systems and financial systems and all of that. So I think focusing on like regenerating people as an isolated component is not, it's going to continue to fragment things and not be a holistic solution. So
I love that. I support that because we're just the missing link in the whole ecosystem if we choose to see it that way. Correct. We're no more than another life species that is dependent on Earth's elements. I'd love to add another aspect to this, which is the talk on value and the need to have brand customer value alignment. So what the brand's value, is it in alignment with customer values, right? And that is a deep discussion in terms of how we value people along the way, along this journey of the fashion and apparel world, that every single one of them, if we value, it's an extension of ourselves, because it's not just a piece of garment, but it's the hands and the hearts that touch it before it even comes to our bodies and our wear. And so to regenerate people is to be able, and social system is to disrupt the way our current way of thinking is, and that the voice we give to others is the extension of our voice, because they are doing us not a favor, but a service, right? And that, you know, we should be valuing that. Otherwise, we all should be making our own clothes, right? And so that that sort of discussion, you know, it's integral to the regeneration of a whole new frontier of fashion. I believe it's really, it needs to be a reset.
I'd like to, that was wonderful, Shamini. I would like to also add that this behavior of overconsumption, of just buying, without any end in sight and it being normal, I think the circular system of kind of introducing this new behavior of good enough and finding new uses for things and not having to be on that drip of buying is also very regenerative for a human being at any individual level. It just feels better when you're not sort of constantly chasing that next thing. So I think that overconsumption and the consuming behavior also can be considered.
When we use the word regenerate, often the word that accompanies that is flourish. How can you help systems, natural systems, human systems, but people also? How can you help them flourish? How can you help them regenerate is the word we use in my field, but it's a form of flourishing.
You know, and
Thriving, yeah.
Yes.
Those are great. I also think the term resilience is really applicable, or Taleb would even go beyond resilience and say anti-fragile, right? And it's something that we've discovered that we have a lot of human systems that are really fragile, right? We've discovered that over the last year of this this global pandemic, is from social systems, social safety nets. The unemployment safety net in the U.S., even in other countries, just trade and cross-border trade and cross-border travel, and all of these systems that we built on and predicated on just continuing to be able to turn over resources and meet each other physically, and all of these kind of base assumptions that we based our economy on. We found that when some of those assumptions are revoked, just the sense of being able to be healthy as you step outside your door, and even just the emotional toll of being sort of cut off from each other physically, we found that there's a real lack of resilience or anti-fragility in a lot of our core systems. And so I think the phrase of the new American administration is build back better. And I know the UN has also used that phrase. It's a worthwhile phrase to think about, is how can we, as we globally go into seeing the beginning of the end with vaccinations against COVID-19 and whatnot, how do we start to think about the fact that we've paused and in a sense broken a lot of our systems, and as we rebuild them, how do we rebuild them to be more resilient or more anti-fragile?
Right. And so that's the point of our discussion today. How do we build back better? How do we create this circular economy that includes the human side, which seems to have been ignored and excluded to this point? We need to think about how we can get humans into this system. So, as I said, many of the critiques focus on inequality and poverty, unemployment, financial exclusion. I'm sure you've read and heard and thought about that waste is a human-made creation, a human-made concept that doesn't exist in nature, but also inequality and poverty, also unemployment, also financial exclusion. These are human-created concepts. And in order to truly focus or truly operate in a circular way, we need to design these out. We need to find ways to address them, to get rid of the waste, to restore our systems and our people, and to keep people in use and talents and skills. So let me wrap this up. Let me go to the next slide. There are, as I mentioned earlier, practitioners and researchers working on solutions, developing models, developing concepts and theories on how we can better integrate humans into the circular economy. And if you'll go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you very briefly the work of Alexander Lamille. I've already mentioned his name. Here's his model. He shows us in the center of this are humans. We are part of nature, but we are also the energy that keeps the technosphere running and operating. So we, as humans, belong to both sides of the butterfly diagram. And the arrows on the bottom going out from the human We provide the energy and the resources and the services needed to make both sides of the butterfly diagram operate. We are the key missing piece of this circular economy that is not really mentioned and not really brought to the forefront. And in exchange for us giving the energy and the resources and the services to make the biosphere operate and the technosphere operate, we also, then these top arrows, need to be nourished from the biosphere through life and food. And we also need to, on the right side, have ways in which the technosphere can help us advance, help us experience life, help us have better access to services. So he is suggesting that the humans are the missing link that holds this all together, and it's overlooked and not discussed. And as a way to address this, he suggests that our priorities really need to be on addressing human needs and how we can use the biosphere and the technosphere to address human needs, how we can design out waste inequality, which we've talked about today, and how to avoid rebound effect, which is another one of the critiques of the circular economy, how to avoid increased consumption because we get so much more efficient and more eco-friendly, and then the consequence is often rebound effect. So this is his model, and I'm going to share, or I guess Asheen will share some readings that further explain his model if you want to read more on his thoughts. And he is the one who talks about this linear flow, progression of our careers, our work life, human labor, and proposes ways in which we can make that more circular. And then the second theorist or practitioner that I want to share, next slide. I'm sure you're all familiar with Kate Rayworth and her donut economics model on the right. Up until about 2 years ago, her model was really very theoretical. It was a good model. It made a lot of sense. She has taken the planetary boundaries, which define the ecological ceiling, and combined that with the human needs and social needs that were identified in the Sustainable Development Goals to define the social foundation. And she's created this model to show how we can simultaneously address both. But about 2 years ago, she started working with the city of Amsterdam. Amsterdam's goal is to become a circular city, but they're also integrating donut economics. And so Amsterdam is a really great example of ways that we can integrate all of these models that address both the environmental, the economic, and the human or social side of things. And the quadrants on the left is from the work being done in Amsterdam. And today we're talking about the first quadrant. What would it look like for people of Amsterdam to thrive? And I've given you a link to read some of the work they're doing. And you can see what they're doing at a city level, how they're repositioning their thinking on what we can do as a city to be more circular, to integrate donut economics so our people can thrive. And they're working with businesses to try to make this happen. It's not just policy decisions, but it's actual changes on the ground. And I think her model, as we move it from theory to implementation, we are learning a lot from this model too on how we can help humans become part of the circular economy. So next slide. So in sum, the principles of the circular economy is one approach in which we can try to identify how we can design out waste, keep people in use, and regenerate social systems to specifically look at these human-created problems of inequality, poverty, unemployment, financial exclusion. So this is one approach. Lamille has another approach. Rayworth has another approach. But there are several people working on this, and I hope today that you've given some thought to how you can apply these principles to your situation, to your business, and how you can help integrate humans into the circular side of the economy. All right, that's all I have. Next slide, I think, is just the end. Yes. So at this time, we can just open it up to discussion and questions and answers.
So does anyone have any just clarifying questions before we go off the record? right, for those of you who are watching the recording, thanks a lot. And for those of you who are still live, we're going to go off the record and ask all those questions that you don't want to be recorded. Cheers, everyone.